Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. Today's episode, number 138, is borders, bindings, and cutting off points. Specifically, we're going to talk about how your method of binding can affect the points on the outside of your quilt. But before we get to that, we have to start at the very beginning to not cut your points off. And that is to have accurate units. Now, these are not all the units that have points on them, but these are three very common ones: the square and a square, flying geese, and V-block. And what's most important is that your size that you want to have is correct, and that you have an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance beyond the point in the square and a square in all 4 places. So remember the lesson. Don't cut out the whole quilt and then do your test block and find out that it's not correct. Do a test block first. Make sure that you are going to get accurate sized pieces. This is why I love the Deb Tucker methods. We overcut slightly and sew, and then we can trim down to perfect. If you sew perfect 100% of the time, you don't need those methods. I'm not one of those people. I cannot sew perfect 100% of the time. So if this is supposed to be a 6-inch finished block, you should be able to take your ruler and measure from here to here. It should be exactly 6.5. Exactly 6.5 from top to bottom, and you should be able to see your 1/4 inch seam allowance in all 4 spots. Your flying goose is supposed to be finished 2x4. This should measure 2.5 inches. This should measure 4.5 inches, and you should be able to see your 1/4 inch seam allowance. Again, little repetitive, but use your rulers, do your measurements. If this is supposed to be a 3-inch finished, you should have 3 inches, 3.5 inches, 3.5 inches, and you should be able to see your 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you don't, you won't get accurate piecing, and you really run a huge risk of cutting your points off all throughout your whole quilt. I want to talk about the points on the outside of your quilt. Give me a break, we're going to switch out the board. Most of my customers cut their bindings 2.5 inches. This is what a folded piece of binding looks at, 2.5 inches. Many people cut 2.25, and I cut mine 2. And I cut mine this small because I like it as even as possible, equal amounts front and back. Let's see how your quilt is affected by what size binding you choose. Now, before we get to the binding, I just want to put these 2 examples of square and a square blocks that I did as a sample. And I can see that I have my accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance in all 4 spots here. And I measured, and I am 6.5 and 6.5. Now, I trim these off so that you can see. If you have a block that looks like this, there is nothing beyond that point. There's a teeny bit beyond that point, but it is not a 1/4 inch. If you had this on the edge of your quilt and then bound it and sewed it a 1/4 inch in, you would be cutting off this point. So I just want to point that out now. Now, here's my samples of different size bindings. In this case, both of these are 2.5 inch cut, but this one on the left is sewn on the front and folded to the back. This one on the right is sewn on the back and brought to the front. There's so many different ways you can choose to do your binding. We like to sew to the back and bring to the front if we're going to machine finish it like on a baby quilt. But if I'm doing something as a special gift for someone or something for myself, I almost always sew to the front and hand stitch to the back. So in this case, the point is perfectly clear here. And so it doesn't matter if you choose 2.5, 2 1/4, 2. If you sew at an accurate 1/4 inch and you have the full 1/4 inch on the edge here, then your binding will come out perfect every time. Here, because this was 2.5 and you sewed it at a 1/4 inch, when it folds over, it cuts off the point. So if you have points on the edge of your quilt, this may not be a method you would choose to use. So it's a reminder we need to think about how the binding choice affects our quilt. Now I took the 2 other sizes and sewed to the back and brought to the front, because we know if we sew to the front and bring to the back, we're going to be fine. Again, the 2 1/4 cuts off the point. The 2 does not. So you could sew this down, machine or hand, but if I was going to hand, I'd do it on the back, but you could sew this down and not cut off your point. Now, one method that I really love to use, and you've seen me do it before, and I especially do it on the smaller items, the candle mats, etc., and that is use my backing to bring up to the front to make my binding. And if I I trim this edge to 1 inch, and then I fold in up to the edge of the piece, and then I fold up. If I do that with my inch, I then cut off my point. So if I have points on the edge of my candle mat or whatever piece I'm doing, this would not be a good method because I'd cut them off. If you cut this to 3/4, you can do it. That is a little bit skinny for me, and 3/4 is just a little bit more difficult to work with than 1 inch. So I really like the inch. So what do you do to solve that problem? It was in the first thing I said when we started the video, borders. A border gets rid of your point on the edge of your piece. And that's what I almost always do. Here are those Christmas mats I was making for my nieces and nephews. And you can see here I have my accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance, but if I went ahead and brought mine up to from the back at 1 inch, I would cut this off. I don't want to do that. How do I solve that problem? You put on a little border. I put on a little border and my points come out absolutely beautifully. So when you have points on the edge of your quilt, you can either add a border to make sure they're now not on the edge of your quilt, or make a binding choice that will not cut those points off. Just another thing to think about as you're quilting. Now, let's get to the winner of the Christmas quilt. The winner of the Christmas quilt is Diana Smith, M like Mary, B like boy. Please send me your mailing address to quiltersheaveninc@gmail.com so I can get that quilt right out to you. Now, we are not announcing a new giveaway today because we are taking a Christmas hiatus. We are going to be off for 3 weeks. The next episode will drop on Monday, January 6th at 7 a.m. So I can take a little time off, get my creative juices going, and hopefully I'll have something really fun to show you in January, and we will then announce a new giveaway. So I really thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a joyous holiday season. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, whatever holiday you celebrate, and have a very safe and happy new year as well. Until next time, happy sewing.